Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a single day that really changed the world. The Battle of Waterloo.
It's an incredible story.
It is. And we're not just talking about a big battle. We're talking about, well, a kind of fatal moment that brings down an entire empire and ends decades of war.
Exactly. Our whole mission here is to take the source material and really get to the heart of June 18th, 1815. Why is this one battle, kind of the twilight for Napoleon, considered so incredibly decisive?
It's the moment that sets up, well, a totally new Europe.
It really is.
And the setup, the context, is just pure drama. I mean, Napoleon escapes from exile on Elba.
Which nobody thought he could do.
Right, he just shows up back in France, and his supporters, they just flock to him. This whole period is what we call the 100 Days Campaign.
And the stakes couldn't have been higher. The moment he's back, the rest of Europe forms what they call the Seventh Coalition. This is a huge alliance.
Yeah.
Everyone, they are absolutely determined to stop him for good this time. So Waterloo, it's the final act in, 23 years of almost constant brutal warfare across the continent.
Okay, so let's get into his strategy. He marches north into what's now Belgium. He's not facing one army, he's facing this massive coalition. How does he even think he can win?
Well, his plan was classic Napoleon. It was the same move he'd perfected his whole career.
Move fast.
Move fast, strike first. He saw the coalition forces, Wellington's Anglo-Allied army, and then the Prussians under Blücher. He saw they were converging, but they hadn't, fully linked up yet.
So he wants to get in between them.
Precisely. Drive a wedge right between them and then defeat them in detail. Hit one army, then turn and hit the other before they can help each other.
And at first, it seems like it's actually working for him. The sources talk about a battle just before Waterloo.
That's right. Just 2 days earlier, he attacks the Prussians at the Battle of Waterloo, and he wins. He pushes them back.
So he thinks they're out of the picture.
He thinks they're temporarily neutralized, yes. Crucially, they weren't destroyed, but they were forced to retreat. So in his mind, they're dealt with. Now he can focus everything on his main goal, the follow-up attack on Wellington near Waterloo.
That initial win gave him a bit of overconfidence, maybe.
A dangerous amount of overconfidence, I'd say.
So let's set the stage for that final showdown. We have Napoleon and his French Imperial army. Who's on the other side of the field near this little village of Waterloo?
Okay, so you've got the Duke of Wellington, and he's leading the Anglo-Allied forces. And it's really important for you, the listener, to know that Anglo-Allied doesn't just mean British.
Right.
It was a truly multinational army. Big groups of Dutch, Belgian, and German soldiers. They're the ones holding the front line.
And then there's the wild card. The army Napoleon thinks is gone.
The ghost in the machine, as you put it, Field Marshal Blücher and the Prussian army.
So you have three of the greatest generals of the age, all converging on this tiny patch of land, or what was then the United Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Now, modern-day Belgium. And that specific location, Wellington's choice of ground, it turns out to be absolutely critical.
This is where it all comes together. The big question, the one that defines everything.
Right.
Why did Napoleon's attack fail so catastrophically?
Yeah.
I mean, to go from a win at Ligny to total annihilation just 2 days later,
Yeah.
that's not just bad luck.
No, not at all. It's a perfect storm, really. It's a combination of his strategic mistakes, some tactical blunders, and most importantly, just incredible enemy resilience.
Okay, let's break that down. Start with Wellington's defense.
Yeah.
What was so special about it?
Wellington was a master of defensive warfare. He chose his ground very, very carefully. And he didn't put his army on top of the ridge, which is what you might expect. No, he placed the bulk of his forces behind it, on the reverse slope.
Oh, so they were hidden.
Completely hidden from the French artillery and infantry. Napoleon's commanders, they couldn't see what they were up against. They had no idea about Wellington's true strength or where his men were deployed.
So the French artillery, which was usually Napoleon's big hammer to smash enemy lines,
It was almost useless. They were firing blind over the crest of this hill. Most of the shots just flew right over the heads of the Allied troops.
wow. So Wellington's whole plan was just to hold on.
Exactly. Hold on, stay hidden, absorb the French attacks, and force Napoleon into these messy, costly frontal assaults until Blücher could get there. That resilience we mentioned, it was engineered by the terrain.
So if the cannons weren't working, Napoleon had to rely on his infantry and his famous cavalry charges.
Yes, and the cavalry charges were a tactical disaster. The sources point to Marshal Ney, who was leading them. He just threw about 10,000 horsemen at Wellington's lines again and again.
But without support.
Often without proper infantry or artillery support, yes. And because Wellington's men were hidden, they had time to get into their defensive square formations.
Impenetrable to cavalry.
Basically impenetrable. They could just stand there and repel the charges with volley after volley of musket fire.
So we have a brilliant defense holding strong, and we have flawed French tactics. But the thing that really turns the tide, the element that makes it a total rout, is the Prussians arriving.
Yes.
Why couldn't Napoleon stop them? This feels like the real aha moment.
It absolutely is. And this is where we see Napoleon's fatal intelligence failure. He thought Blücher, after Ligny, was beaten and retreating east, away from the fight.
But he was wrong.
Completely wrong. Blücher was hurt, sure, but his army was intact. And he had retreated south toward a place called Wavre, which was still close enough to march and support Wellington.
And this wrong assumption leads Napoleon to make a huge mistake. The detachment of Marshal Grouchy.
That's the detail that seals his fate. Napoleon sends Marshal Grouchy with about 33,000 men, that's a third of his whole army, to go chase the Prussians and make sure they don't come back.
But Grouchy's chasing a phantom army, basically.
He's chasing a ghost, while the main Prussian force is doing this incredible flanking march to get to Waterloo.
So it's just a perfect storm of failure. At Waterloo, Napoleon is throwing his main army against a hidden, resilient enemy.
While missing the 33,000 men he desperately needs to actually break through.
And those 33,000 men are completely failing at their job of stopping Blücher.
It's an operational catastrophe. By mid-afternoon, the first Prussian troops start showing up on Napoleon's right flank. This immediately forces him to pull vital reserves away from the main fight to deal with this new threat. He realizes, way too late, he's fighting on two fronts.
And this is when he sends in the Imperial Guard. The final, desperate push.
Yes, his last gamble. The Imperial Guard, his veterans, the men he thought were invincible, he sends them right at Wellington's center, hoping to smash through before the Prussians can fully arrive.
But Wellington's line, because of that reverse slope defense, was much stronger than Napoleon thought.
It was surprisingly intact, and when the Guard for the first time wavered and then broke, the famous cry went up, "La Garde recule!" The Guard retreats.
And that's it, the psychological breaking point.
It's the end. The moment the old Guard broke, with Prussians now pouring onto the field, the French army's morale just evaporated.
The sources say the result was just total.
It wasn't a retreat. It was an annihilation of his army as an organized fighting force. Their ability to wage war was destroyed in a few hours.
And the political fallout for Napoleon himself must have been immediate.
Oh, incredibly swift. He was forced to abdicate just 4 days later. He knew it was over.
And this leads directly to the restoration of the monarchy in France.
Instantly. King Louis VIII is put back on the throne. It's like turning back the clock on the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era.
And for Napoleon, a final exile.
Yeah.
Much farther away this time.
Much farther. After the Elbe escape, the coalition was taking zero chances. They sent him thousands of miles away to St. Helena, a tiny remote island in the middle of the South Atlantic.
Where he died a few years later.
In 1821, Waterloo didn't just end his campaign, it literally removed him from the board. Forever.
So let's connect all this back. Why is Waterloo seen as one of history's truly decisive battles? Maybe more so than his other defeats.
Because it wasn't just a military loss. It achieved the ultimate strategic objective. It permanently removed Napoleon as a political and military force. And by doing that, it brought an end to 23 years of chaos and ushered in a completely new political order in Europe.
So to recap it for you, the listener, Waterloo wasn't just a loss. It was this perfectly timed convergence. You had Wellington's genius defensive strategy.
Using that reverse slope to preserve his forces.
You had the French tactical mistakes, like the unsupported cavalry charges, and the massive operational blunder of sending Grouchy's corps away.
And tying it all together was the intelligence failure. Napoleon's inability to see what Blücher was really doing. That alliance between Wellington and Blücher, it held at the most critical moment possible.
The sources also really stress the long-term impact, which is easy to miss in all the military drama.
Yes, and it's so profound. After decades of non-stop war, Waterloo ushers in this long period of relative peace and stability in Europe. It was the definitive end to the age of revolution and French expansion that had dominated the continent for a generation.
It's just staggering, isn't it? One day of fighting buys Europe decades of peace.
It really is. And that brings up a final thought for you to really consider based on what we've discussed. Think about the sheer weight of a single piece of bad intelligence. Napoleon's failure to correctly guess what his enemy would do, his assumption that Blücher was beaten and gone, that didn't just cost him a battle. It didn't just cost him his throne. It literally defined the geopolitical map of Europe for the next century. Just think about that cascading failure, all stemming from one wrong assumption about one rival general. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are marching straight into one of history's most famous battlefields. Waterloo, 1815. I mean, this is it. The battle that seals Napoleon's fate really ends a century of French dominance and just completely redefines the power map of Europe.
It's a name everyone knows for sure.
Yeah.
But the story we usually get, that Wellington just outsmarted Napoleon, it's way too simple.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, our goal in this deep dive is to synthesize all this source material and really get into how this thing actually happened. It was a perfect storm of strategy, some really bad tactical calls, and honestly, some unbelievable global forces at play.
Exactly. We want to give you the shortcut to understanding this pivotal defeat. We're not looking for just one reason. We're trying to untangle this complex knot of decisions, some brilliant, some deeply flawed, that brought the whole thing crashing down for the emperor.
And the sources are pretty clear on this. The defeat wasn't about one moment of genius from the coalition. It was more like a cascade of failures on the French side.
A perfect storm, you said.
A true perfect storm. You have strategic blunders, critical errors on the field, and just some terrible environmental luck all hitting at the exact same time.
Okay, let's unpack that. And I think we have to start with what for me was the most surprising piece of the research. We're not starting on the battlefield in Belgium.
No.
We're starting 7,000 miles away in Indonesia. We're talking about a volcano.
Yeah, this is where geology just smashes right into military history. The weather at Waterloo, the constant heavy rain that turned the ground into a swamp.
Right.
That wasn't just a bit of bad European weather. It was very likely influenced by the massive eruption of Mount Tambora back in April of 1815.
Hold on. So Napoleon is fighting for his empire in June, and a volcano that blew its top 2 months earlier, halfway around the world, is actually dictating his battlefield timing.
Absolutely. The Tambora eruption was one of the largest in recorded history. It pumped just a colossal amount of ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. It created what people later called the year without a summer in 1816, but the effects were already hitting Europe's weather in 1815. Unseasonably cold, incredibly wet.
So for Napoleon, the immediate consequence is just mud, a totally saturated battlefield. How does something like that physically impact what was then the most advanced army in the world?
Well, the impact was crippling, really. I mean, the first, just maneuverability. Moving tens of thousands of men, supplies, and especially heavy artillery through knee-deep mud.
Yeah.
It just slowed everything to a crawl.
And the whole French doctrine was based on speed, on rapid movement.
Exactly. The mud basically neutralized their biggest advantage right out of the gate.
And you mentioned the artillery. That was Napoleon's prized weapon. He had the best guns in Europe.
He did, but those heavy cannon, the ones that were supposed to blast Wellington's lines to pieces before the attack even started, they were sinking into the mud.
So they couldn't be aimed properly.
Right. They couldn't be moved quickly. And the soft ground just absorbed the recoil. It massively reduced their effectiveness, their rate of fire. His hammer became a sponge.
But the truly catastrophic result, the third point here, was just about time. The mud forced a delay, and that delay, according to every source we looked at, bought the coalition crucial, life-saving time.
It really did. The biggest danger for Wellington was always the Prussians under Marshal Blücher. They'd been beaten a couple of days earlier at Ligny, but they weren't destroyed.
They were regrouping.
They were regrouping, and they were marching to help Wellington. So every single hour that Napoleon was stuck, waiting for the ground to dry even a little bit, was another hour that Blücher's army got closer.
The clock was ticking. It's like the volcanic ash put the brakes on Napoleon's war machine just long enough for his biggest nightmare to become a reality. And that brings us from the global scale right down to Napoleon's choices on the morning of the battle.
Yes, because the delay wasn't just a fact of nature. It became a tactical decision. Napoleon looked at the soaked ground on the morning of June 18th, and he chose to wait. He waited until almost 11:30 a.m. to start his main attack.
And his thinking in a vacuum makes some sense. He wanted the ground to dry out so his artillery would be effective. He knew he couldn't break those famous British defensive squares without a massive bombardment first.
It's a tempting calculation, but it was a fatal one. Our sources are pretty clear that by 11:30, when that first cannon fired, the first Prussian units were already starting to appear on Napoleon's right flank.
Wow.
That 5 or 6 hour delay from dawn to late morning was the exact window the Prussians needed.
Okay, so the battle finally kicks off late, and we move straight from a strategic delay into, well, tactical blunders. The most famous, of course, is Marshal Ney and his cavalry.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can almost feel the frustration in the French command. They're delayed, they know the Prussians are coming, and things start to get a bit frantic. Ney, the bravest of the brave, sees some movement in Wellington's line, mistakes it for a retreat, and he makes an impulsive call.
He just sends in the cavalry, wave after wave of his best heavy horsemen, without any real support. Why was that so disastrous?
Because he sent them straight at the perfect countermeasure.
Yeah.
The British infantry squares. A well-formed square is basically a fortress of bayonets. A horse just will not charge onto a wall of sharp steel points.
So the cavalry just had to circle around them uselessly.
Uselessly, yeah, and worse than that.
Yeah.
Ney launched this attack without coordinating with his own infantry or artillery. If he'd sent infantry up, they could have forced the squares to break formation, then the cavalry would have been affected.
And he didn't.
He didn't. He just charged. The result was pure carnage. The French heavy cavalry, these elite cuirassiers, they were just sitting ducks. They're circling the squares, getting picked off by coordinated musket fire and blasted with grape shot from British cannons placed between the squares.
He essentially destroyed his own cavalry.
He threw it away. Thousands of veteran troopers and their horses gone. It crippled French momentum and took away Napoleon's ability to exploit any breakthrough later in the day.
You can almost see the battle slipping away in that one decision. But even if you take out the weather and you take out Ney's blunder, the sources say the whole campaign was maybe doomed by strategic mistakes Napoleon made even before the battle started.
That's right. If we zoom out a bit, the foundational error, what many see as the real cause of the defeat, was his decision to split his army after the Battle of Ligny.
Which is so strange because concentration of force was his whole playbook. That was his genius.
It was. But here, he detaches Marshal Grouchy with around 33,000 men. That's nearly a third of his entire army.
And he just sends them off to...
What?
Chase the Prussians.
Pretty much. He gave Grouchy this vague mission to pursue the Prussians and stop them from linking up with Wellington. But this is where Napoleon made two huge underestimations.
Okay.
First, he underestimated their resilience. He thought they were broken, demoralized, and retreating away from the fight. Second, he underestimated their commander, Blücher, who was absolutely determined to join Wellington. He made this incredible decision to march to the sound of the guns.
So those 33,000 men with Grouchy, they were fighting a completely pointless battle somewhere else while Napoleon was desperate for reinforcements at Waterloo?
They were the troops that would have won him the battle. They could have been the reserves to break Wellington's line, or maybe more importantly, they could have protected his right flank from the Prussians who were showing up.
So it was a self-inflicted wound born from just bad assumptions.
Bad assumptions and underestimating his opponents, which leads to the other thing he misjudged, Wellington himself.
And his defensive strategy, right?
Exactly. Wellington was a master of defense, and he picked his ground perfectly. He hid most of his troops behind a ridge on the reverse slope.
So the French artillery couldn't get a clear shot.
They were firing half blind. And Wellington didn't just use the ridge. He fortified key strong points. The farmhouses of Hougoumont and La Haye-Saint.
Hougoumont especially.
Hougoumont was like an anchor for the whole Allied line. Napoleon wasted thousands of men trying to take it all day, men he desperately needed for the main assault. But it held. It just bled him dry.
So it's a cascade. He underestimates the terrain, the defenses, and ultimately the sheer will and coordination of his enemies.
That's the synthesis, really. The failure to stop the Prussians from marching, a march made possible by the volcanic weather delay, was the critical failure. When Blücher finally arrived in force, the coalition suddenly had superior numbers, and it was a huge morale boost right when the French were exhausted.
It shows how history is never just one thing. It's a chain reaction. So if we put all the pieces back together for the listener, what's the big picture?
Looking at all the sources, Napoleon's defeat was a multi-layered disaster. It really did start with a global event, that volcano, causing the critical delay.
Right. The delay gives Blücher the time he needs. That delay then forces Napoleon into a tactical waiting game, which turns out to be fatal.
Yes, and that allows the Prussians to start arriving, just as Marshal Ney is making this staggering tactical error, wasting the French cavalry against unbreakable squares.
And the whole thing is built on top of the strategic mistake, splitting his forces. He didn't even have his full army at the decisive point.
It's all connected. Underestimating Wellington's defense, underestimating Blücher's will to fight, It all comes together.
So what here is that Waterloo wasn't just Wellington being a better general on the day. It was a total systems failure for the French.
It really was. It shows how even the greatest figures in history can be brought down when these big external forces amplify their own mistakes. The margin for error was just gone.
It's a reminder that a good strategy isn't just about what you can control. It's about how you adapt to what you can't. Like a cloud of volcanic ash and having a realistic view of your opponent.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's the final thought that really sticks with me. How often are the outcomes of these huge human conflicts decided not just by generals and tactics, but by these massive, uncontrollable environmental forces? A volcano erupts thousands of miles away, and it ends up dictating the timing of a cavalry charge that brings down an empire in Belgium.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't a neat story. It's messy.
Yeah.
We're always interacting with forces, geological, climatic, that are way bigger than any one person or army. Understanding that interconnectedness at Waterloo, I think, gives you a much richer picture than the simple legend.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex and truly surprising fall of Napoleon. Keep exploring those connections. You never know what you'll find. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in what is arguably the most analyzed single moment in all of military history.
It has to be.
The Battle of Waterloo, June 18th, 1815. And when you picture that day, you probably see, Wellington's squares holding the line.
The Imperial Guard charging.
It's that final desperate charge.
Yeah.
And then the total collapse of French power. And while those images are, they're powerful and they're true, our stack of sources today really demands a much broader focus. We're not just here to retell Wellington's story.
No.
We're diving deep into the decisive and I think often strategically underplayed role of the Prussian army. So our mission is pretty clear. Unpack the evidence and show precisely how Field Marshal von Blücher and his troops were the game-changing element.
The actual turning point.
The true turning point that ensured Napoleon's final comprehensive defeat.
And it's so vital we start there by just reframing the whole narrative. I mean, historians often treat the Prussian arrival as this, welcome bonus.
Right, like the cavalry coming over the hill at the last minute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the sources show it was the critical catalyst. Their contribution wasn't just helpful, it was decisive. And what makes it so remarkable is the context. These guys were operating under extreme duress. They just had a crushing defeat 48 hours earlier. So for anyone wanting the complete picture of how Napoleon was beaten, you have to understand this.
What that?
It was a coalition victory, sure, but one achieved through this sheer, almost reckless organizational persistence.
Okay, let's start right there, because the context of June 16th, just 2 days before, it changes everything. We talk about Waterloo, but we have to start at Ligny.
You have to.
Blücher's army got hit hard there. A staggering defeat facing Napoleon himself. For the listener, this sounds like a total loss. An army defeated, maybe routed, thousands of casualties. They should be out of the campaign.
Gone.
So if you're Wellington, getting ready for your big showdown, the loss of your main allies should trigger a full retreat, right? Why didn't they just fall apart?
Well, the sources show this fascinating blend of just pure grit and a certain high command philosophy. Napoleon genuinely believed they were done for.
He was banking on it.
Oh, absolutely. His later actions show he banked on the Prussians retreating east back towards their homeland to go lick their wounds and reorganize.
And they had good reason to. What were the casualties like?
16,000 casualties. They'd lost cannons, standards. It was devastating.
Wow.
But Blücher, they called him Marshal Forward for a reason.
Yeah.
He had this aggressive temperament, and he just refused to consider a retreat east. His ability to keep his army in the field and immediately reorganize is, I think, the first often missed turning point.
So instead of running home?
Instead of that, the internal accounts describe them shifting their line of march north towards Wavre, always keeping that commitment to Wellington in mind. That single decision, made under just immense stress, kept the whole campaign alive.
That decision to reorganize north, towards the British instead of east, that must have taken an incredible amount of effort, logistically and just in terms of morale. How do you pull that off?
It was a nightmare. The key was leadership and really, really good staff work. They managed to find scattered units, reorganized supply wagons, and maybe most importantly, reestablished discipline incredibly fast.
And Blücher himself.
One account says he was in a feverish state. He'd been captured and almost killed at Ligny, but his iron will just drove the whole operation forward.
Yeah.
And that tenacity, it immediately translates into this high-stakes coordination with the Allied command.
Which brings us to the communication. Wellington is getting his army into position at Waterloo. He's facing Napoleon's main force, and he needs a guarantee.
He needs to know.
What do the sources say about that agreement? How solid was it?
That guarantee was everything. Wellington had a strong defensive position, sure, but he knew he was outnumbered. The sources are crystal clear on this. His entire decision to stand and fight at Waterloo hinged on Blücher's firm assurance that the Prussian forces would march to join him.
So if Blücher had said, "We need a day or two,"
Wellington would have fallen back to Brussels, no question. The risk of facing Napoleon alone was just too high. So that strategic commitment, that promise carried by Blücher's staff officers, was the literal foundation that Wellington built his entire defense on.
the whole thing becomes a holding action.
Exactly. It's designed specifically to buy time and wait for the Prussians to arrive.
You can just feel the tension, can't you? Messengers riding between Wavre and Waterloo with the fate of Europe on their backs. Okay, that crucial agreement is in place. Let's fast forward to the day itself, June 18th. This next stage is all about execution, logistics, and just human endurance.
It really is.
The I forces had to march, what, about 12 miles?
About that, yeah. Through what were rapidly becoming just awful conditions.
And the timing of their arrival is everything. So what time did those first Prussian units actually start to appear on the field?
The timing is maybe the single most important tactical detail of the whole day. That heavy rain that had actually helped Wellington's defenses
Turn the roads into a swamp.
into thick mud. The Prussian march starts early that morning from Wavre, but the terrain, the sheer number of troops, it just slowed them down drastically.
This isn't a quick reinforcement.
No, this is not a rapid cavalry force. This is infantry, artillery, supplies, all moving through bottlenecks. They arrived in the late afternoon,
How late?
around 4:30 p.m. So this isn't a fresh morning reinforcement. It's an injection of almost 50,000 men, precisely when the battle is at its bloody climax. Both the Anglo-Allied and the French forces are just completely exhausted.
And that number, nearly 50,000, that's astonishing given what happened at Ligny. Who were these troops?
Well, the main contingent was the Avi Corps under General von Bülow. And it's important to note, this corps had seen less fighting at Ligny.
So they were the freshest troops available.
They were the most effective force available for the march, yes. Bülow's corps was about 30,000 men alone, and then it was supplemented by elements of other corps that Blücher had managed to reform and push forward.
So we're talking about 48,000 men.
Resolute, if very muddy and very tired, men entering the fray. And this completely disrupts Napoleon's troop balance, just as he's getting ready for his final decisive assaults on Wellington Center.
Okay, so let's unpack that tactical application. They don't just show up randomly. They strike a specific point. Where do they arrive, and why was that spot so critical?
They hit Napoleon's right flank. Specifically, they targeted the crucial village of Plancenoit.
Plancenoit, okay.
And this was Napoleon's vulnerable hinge for two big reasons. First, it threatened his entire line of communication, his only escape route back to France. And second, it was right next to where Napoleon had stationed his reserves, including the Young Guard.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, their arrival forces Napoleon to react.
Immediately, he's forced into a defensive posture against the last thing he expected. A whole new army appearing out of the woods. He had to divert significant resources, crucially, parts of his Imperial Guard, away from his main attack on Wellington, just to defend Plancenoit.
And that diversion, that sounds like the moment the battle just swings completely. It cripples his ability to commit everything to that central attack.
That's it. The pressure on Wellington's line, especially after those massive cavalry charges earlier, it was immense. If Napoleon had been able to throw his entire remaining reserve at Wellington Center,
The line might have broken.
it likely would have broken. But because Blücher is bearing down on Plancenoit, Napoleon has to siphon off his best troops to hold that village.
Which gives Wellington breathing room.
Critical breathing room. That hour or two, he desperately needed to consolidate his squares before the final French challenge came. I mean, one account from Prussian staff officer just says, "We did what we promised, and we came just in time."
It really does transform the narrative. It's not just Wellington standing firm. It's Wellington being strategically enabled to stand firm.
Yes.
By this perfectly timed, perfectly placed flank attack This wasn't luck. This was Blücher honoring his commitment despite a catastrophic defeat just days before.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that decisive blow. The diversion was key, but the assault itself, especially on Plancenoit, must have been brutal.
Oh, it was ferocious. A battle within a battle. The fighting for Plancenoit was maybe the bloodiest part of the entire day.
Really?
The Prussian forces under Bülow just threw themselves into the village, assaulting this strong point, defended by the French Young Guard. This intense back-and-forth fighting ties down Napoleon's most reliable reserve forces. It stops them from supporting that final grand attack on Wellington.
And this is where the two armies start to work in concert.
This is where it all comes together.
Yeah.
When Wellington sees his opportunity to launch his final counterattack, right as the Imperial Guard is being repulsed, it's because the French flank is collapsing under the weight of this Prussian assault.
So the French army is just caught.
Utterly exhausted, demoralized by the failure of the Guard, and now they find themselves fighting two major forces on two completely separate fronts.
Right.
That combined, coordinated pressure just shattered their morale and their formation at the same time.
This is where it gets really interesting and where the sources really highlight Blücher's genius. What happens after the battle?
Yes.
Most history books, they kind of end the story with Napoleon's retreat at dusk, but that wasn't the end of the campaign.
Absolutely not. Victory wasn't secured by breaking the line. It was secured by the relentless follow-through that night. Blücher, despite being 72 years old and exhausted, was determined to give Napoleon no quarter.
So what does he do?
We need to talk about the cavalry of the night. This was Blücher's aggressive, persistent pursuit of the retreating French. This wasn't a pause to celebrate. The Prussian cavalry and light infantry were immediately ordered to hunt down every last French soldier they could find.
And this goes on all night.
All night long, covering miles of muddy, crowded roads.
What's the human cost of that? To demand that kind of effort from an army that had just marched 12 miles through mud and then fought a huge battle.
The cost was staggering, but Blücher understood the strategic imperative. The sources are clear on this. Previous coalition victories against Napoleon often failed because they didn't deliver that knockout blow.
Right, he'd always escape and regroup.
And Blücher was going to make sure that did not happen again. By relentlessly chasing the French, shooting, capturing, dispersing them, they ensured the French army just dissolved into a panicked mob.
So there was no chance for Napoleon to rally.
No chance at all. No chance to rally troops to cover his retreat. No chance to form a cohesive defense the next day. It was over.
So what does this all mean for the end of the war? That midnight pursuit, it guarantees more than just a battle win.
It ensures a comprehensive victory. The relentless action broke the French army as a functional fighting force. It wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was the total collapse of Napoleon's last viable army. And that destruction, directly attributable to Blücher's persistence, is what leads immediately to Napoleon's final abdication and exile. It ends the whole 100 Days campaign. Within days, not weeks or months.
That really does solidify it. You have these three pivotal phases for Blücher. The incredible reorganization after Ligny, the committed, perfectly timed arrival that let Wellington hold, and then this aggressive pursuit that sealed Napoleon's fate.
That's the most concise way to put it. The sources confirm it. Success was rooted in that high-level coordination and just the sheer commitment to relentless follow-through. Blücher's tenacity, from the mud-cage march of Bülow's corps to the cold, dark pursuit of the French fugitives, was absolutely vital.
It's a remarkable story, just of commitment and persistence against massive, massive challenges. Thank you for connecting all those sources for us.
My pleasure.
And as we close this deep dive, here is a final thought for you to consider, based entirely on the source material we've discussed. If Blücher, after that huge setback at Ligny, had decided that prudence required, say, a full 24 hours of rest before marching.
If he had just paused.
Just pause for a day to fully recover and refit. How would that single decision have altered the outcome at Waterloo? And how would the absence of that flank attack and the night pursuit have fundamentally prolonged or even changed the course of 19th century European history? The victory wasn't just decided by the battle, it was decided by the lack of rest. Think about the historical significance of sustained, relentless effort.